Next, I'm going to show you how to sharpen an image in Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to open this image of these flowers, and I can right click on them and select Open in Camera Raw even though it's a JPEG. And I could go in and I could make adjustments on my flowers anywhere that I like under the Basics menu here. But the third one over, which has the triangle stacked, is actually the sharpening menu in Camera Raw. And as you can see here, I can go in and apply sharpening much like I can using the Smart Sharpen filter and the Unsharp Mask filter. Now, a couple of things. If you sharpen in Camera Raw, it will not save your sharpening effect to your image unless you go down and save your image out of Camera Raw. If you just click Open Image, you will lose the sharpening. So you could go through, do all your edits on your image, save it, and then go back into Bridge and open it in Camera Raw and apply your sharpening if you want. Or if you know you're not going to make any edits in Photoshop, all your editing is done in Raw, you could just go through Camera Raw, crop, and sharpen here, and then save your image out. Now, if you sharpen in Camera Raw, you should not globally sharpen your image in Adobe Photoshop. You could go into Photoshop and maybe additionally sharpen just the eyes in an image or something like that. But you should not run sharpening in both applications. Now, to globally sharpen your image in Adobe Camera Raw, that is what we're doing when we're just applying these different settings. And if I click my masking, you can see it doesn't look like much is happening. If I hold down my Alt or Option key and drag, however, you can see the area that's being sharpened. Okay, if I release, now we see a much more drastic difference. Now, 122 is way too much sharpening. Let's bring this down to about 48. By now we're very familiar with what radius does. Because this is a flower, I'm going to put this at about 1.7 or maybe down to 1.5. There we go. Now, detail allows me to control the level of detail that Camera Raw is going to bring out. And so if I crank this way up, Camera Raw is searching through and finding all the detail in the image. However, you would only want to bring this slider way up to this end if you had a super detailed image. For the most part, you're going to want to keep it at around 40. Now, masking. That's the one that I showed you earlier where you hold down the Alt or Option key and slide it to the left or the right. And the areas showing up in white are the edges that are going to receive the sharpening. If I leave this set all the way down at 0, it will globally sharpen the entire image. However, if I slide my masking up to select just the edges that I would like to have sharpened, then it will only sharpen those edges we see in white. And so I'm going to bring this up to about 70 and leave that there. Again, to get that black and white, all I had to do was hold down my Alt or Option key as I drag the slider. Now, Luminance controls the amount of grayscale noise that Camera Raw tries to decrease in your image by smoothing out the pixels. So before you go in and make changes to Luminance, you'll want to be at 100%. So go ahead and zoom into 100% and find an area of your image that has a lot of detail. Now, drag the slider to the right to reduce the amount of grainy splotches in your image. Usually about 25 is the right amount. If it's an extremely noisy image, you may have to experiment a little more. Now, Luminance Detail controls the luminance noise threshold. So how much smoothing Camera Raw is performing on that grayscale noise in Luminance. On very noisy images, you would drag this to the left. However, for the most part, you would drag it to the right, and that helps you to preserve more details and applies less noise reduction. And this image doesn't really have that much noise. And so I'm going to drag it to the right till I get to about 60. Now, Luminance Contrast allows me to adjust the image's contrast. And so if you want a less noisy image, you would drag this to the left. If your image has a lot of color noise, you can slide the color slider to the right, and it will go in and attempt to remove the color noise from your image. Once you've done that, you have access to the color detail sliders and the color smoothness sliders, which address the color noise within your images individually. This image didn't really have any color noise, so I'm going to leave that set at 0. I'm going to go ahead and replace my radius with settings of 1.2. Going to bring my amount down to about 40. Let me look at my mask. I may lower it just a little bit and zoom out. Now, the hard part about sharpening in RAW is you can't just turn it on and off. You don't get to see the before and after. So it makes it a little more difficult to do. Really, the only way to see exactly what's happening in Camera Raw is to hold down your Alt or Option key as you slide. And so as you slide to the left or right, you can see the areas of the image that are being affected. So sharpening, we'll convert it to black and white. Radius, I can see my edges. Detail, the same. I can see the edges that are being affected. And masking you're already familiar with as we were looking at it previously. Now that's global sharpening. If you wanted to do localized sharpening, then all you would have to do is go up and select your adjustment brush and come down and bump up the sharpening and paint it in the specific area that you want to be sharpened. Adjust your other settings. And that's how you can go about getting localized sharpening from within Camera Raw. Now, I am going to delete that adjustment. And now we're back to just our previous sharpening settings. Once you've got those settings and you've played with some of the masking and different things within Camera Raw, then you're going to need to save the image. And so you're going to select Save Image. This is going to be 11G, your last name, then the document name. You're going to save this one as a JPEG. So select JPEG. Make sure you have sRGB selected. Make sure that you select your Chapter 11 folder and then click Save. And now when I look at Bridge, I can scroll down and there's my image. Sharpening is extremely important. Once again, needs to be done to every single one of your images, but it doesn't have to be overly powerful. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want glowing edges, etc. So doing it right is extremely important. And that means doing it on its own layer and doing it at the end of the retouching and refining process.